You are listening to the Foreign Policy Focus podcast.
We cannot wait for the final proof. The smoking gun could come in the form of a mushroom cloud.
Haven't you driven enough people from their homes already? Bulldoze their villages, seize their property and their laws. They had no part in making.
Now working in Libya with friends and allies, we've demonstrated what collective action can achieve in the 21st century.
Now the host of the show, Kyle Ansel.
This is episode 407 of the Foreign Policy Focus podcast. I think I got a good show today talking about weapon sales, Afghanistan, Yemen, and Syria. So I need you all to share the show. You find it online at thelibertarianinstitute.org. If you're a new listener, make sure you subscribe to the show. It should be on all of your favorite podcatchers and YouTube. And if you really like the show and want to get it on the monthly live stream, I just finished this month's live stream last night. I think it came out pretty good. So you can watch the video if you are a donor to the show at patreon.com/foreignpolicyfocus. If you're not a donor, you donate $5 a month and you get access to that content. All right, so starting off with weapon sales here. For the fiscal year 2019, we now have it in that the U.S. Sold over $54 billion in weapons overseas. Most of this was to what they labeled as partner countries, so I'm guessing this is NATO and any other country that has like a preferred weapons buying status. I would guess Israel, even though it's not NATO, would fall under this category. There was also a lot of weapons handed out in different kinds of form of military aid. So whether that be to the Ukraine, to Egypt, Israel, etc., we give military aid to the Syrian Kurds, to a lot of different people. That's all counted under that category. It seems like the general trend is upwards. I was looking at the numbers from 2013 to 2017, so I got 2018 in there missing. But they showed like between $30 and $40 billion in foreign weapon sales. The article I read on it did mention that, hey, these weapon sales are often done in big deals. So this year, the United States company Lockheed Martin delivered the first shipment of F-35s to South Korea, which, by the way, are pieces of junk. And there's a great article at antiwar.com. I'll link to it in the show notes page. This is going to be a brief tangent by Stu Smallwood. And it's a great article on how not only is the F-35 a piece of junk, but it also is hurting the North Korean-South Korean relationship. Now, is South Korea buying 20 to 40 F-35s going to be enough to, enrage Kim Jong-un into never having talks with the South Koreans? Well, probably not, but it's just more problems that get in the way when, right now any potential peace is extremely fragile, and the president of South Korea, standing in front of a bunch of American-made F-35s as they arrive into his country, and of course, he's touting the capability of the planes. While I know, and while my audience knows, because I've talked about on the show, that these planes have a ton of failures, right? I guess they really haven't been battle tested, and Lockheed Martin isn't going to even have the machine to test the planes to see if they're kind of, I guess, ready and all the software works for battles in different kinds of conditions until the end of 2019. So all the planes that the South Koreans are receiving right now, well, they have a major deficiency in them. Dan Glazier, I believe, did a great report on the F-35 at the Project for Government Oversight, POGO. And again, I'll take the time to link to this in the show notes page, and it's linked inside it heavily in Stu Smallwood's article. But what Dan Glazier's report finds is there's over 100 category 1 issues that need to be addressed. And so, these are things that could lead to, I guess, a pilot potentially getting killed or the mission failing. So this plane has tons of shortcomings, but, it's touted as this amazing plane that has all these stealth capabilities. And so if you're Kim Jong-un and you have to worry that, one day this plane will be functional, or it's more functional than the naysayers in the United States who, a lot of times the people who point out the F-35 as a piece of junk are the same people that are, kind of smeared by the enlightened establishment crowd as being coots. And so, while we're saying the F-35 is a piece of junk, I'm sure Kim Jong-un and the Chinese, for that matter, have to look at kind of the fact sheet on the F-35 that Lockheed Martin puts out and think that we have to have a technology available to combat this, since there's now, dozens of these things in South Korea. Stu Smallwood points out that, hey, this is probably the reason for the rash of weapons tests that we saw from the North Koreans. Moon Jae-in of South Korea showed off his F-35. So Kim Jong-un, the leader of the North Koreans, felt like he had to show off his missile, submarine-launched ballistic missile to say, hey, look, you may have the F-35, but we could still hit you back, even if you're taking out our ballistic missile position. Anyways, I really liked Stu's article, so I would just recommend checking out that for more details on this. But I think that was a really good insight that he had into what was really going on in North Korea and highlighting the importance of the F-35 sales to South Korea, which other than that, if it's covered in mainstream media, it's like a photo op event, right? You got Moon Jae-in standing in front of the F-35, some Lockheed executive or the president there, whatever her name is, kind of standing in front of the plane, or with Moon Jae-in having a nice handshake. Oh, this is the common defense of our countries and everything else. The last point that he makes in that article that I think is important to this overall discussion about weapons sales is that for the North Koreans, this is the price of being an American ally. If you're an American ally, you buy American-made weapons, and those American-made weapons probably don't live up to the capabilities that you're promised. They cost you a lot of money, and at the same time, they create a situation where anybody who sees you and your alliance with the Americans as a threat upgrade and advance their weaponry. And this is, just one here example in South Korea. Now, of course, the other thing going on in South Korea where they have some real tensions with the Japanese right now. And so who knows, maybe, U.S. F-35s made for the Koreans and F-35s made for the Japanese eventually end up dogfighting, out there in the Pacific Ocean or something like that. I mean, I think that's a little absurd and we're kind of far away from that. But, just goes to show, kind of like with Syria that we'll talk about later and a lot on the show. If you start selling all these weapons to everybody, people are going to start using them against each other, including your allies. $54 billion is a lot of money, though. There's a lot of profits being made by the top weapons executives. And while Trump and the rest of, pretty much the Washington establishment, I think this is true of the Democrats, too. One of the few things they haven't attacked him on foreign policy is this ridiculous claim he has, which I believe was debunked by William Hartung, that this is creating a whole bunch of jobs and is a boom for America's economy. And these weapon sales absolutely aren't. So I want to touch on Spain and the Catalonia situation real quick. I've done my best to follow this as it's unfolded on the show. So people, who started listening to the show, at the very beginning, and a situation that I talked about quite a bit was the Catalonia independence movement. This is a region of Spain that includes Barcelona. It's one of the most, industrious and economically productive areas of Spain. And so I think the people of that region feel, one, they have their own independent culture, and two, I think feel a little bit oppressed and stolen from by the central government in Spain, economy that we know has been very mismanaged, and wanted to seek their own independence. And, I don't know what all the other reasons were and everything, but they held a referendum. This was an independence vote. And, while the Spanish central government could have, chosen to ignore it or say that it doesn't matter, and, prosecute the people in court and basically just hold on to Catalonia, they rather chose to send their police in, which, dressed like full black thuds, swinging clubs, to try to break up the protest. And so you see here, and this is amazing footage, and I remember watching it, was October 1st, 2017. These cops steal ballot boxes in a Western country, and you're like, what kind of democracy is this? How are, riot police stealing ballot boxes? But then it got worse. You saw, Catalan firemen who were literally draping themselves across people attempting to vote and take the beatings from the Spanish police. And then you saw, the Spanish police go as far as to actually beat old women with billy clubs for trying to go out and vote. And, watching that and kind of seeing some of the reaction on day, I thought this might be a kind of a big event. Well, first of all, you could possibly have a group vote itself independent from the rest of the state. But the overreaction from the thuggish Spanish police was really disturbing and created really disturbing video. Later that day, some lunatic went and shot up a concert in Las Vegas, and nobody ever really talked about the Catalan independence movement, especially not in American media again. So rather than there being any condemnation of Spain for cracking down on peaceful people holding a referendum and trying to go out and exercise what everybody in every Western style democracy says is like a God-given right to go out and vote, were rather beaten by police. Spain gets no condemnation for that, and then they go on what you think is like a Mid-East kind of level, something you would see out of Recep Erdogan, going after the people who organized the referendum, locking them in jail. The president of Catalonia flees the country, I believe in 2 different countries, but definitely now in Belgium twice. Spain has issued an extradition warrant for his arrest, and the governments have told Spain, go to hell. This in no way is a crime. You have no evidence of it. Now, of course, they're not going directly after, they held an election and therefore committed treason. But, the problems include sedition and misuse of public funds. I guess those are the charges, I should say, against the leaders of the Catalan government who held this referendum. Spain, at the same time completely upends this Catalan government and basically, I think, forces them to hold another kind of vote and really tries to pin them to pick a non-independence party, but the non-independence party, I believe, ends up winning again. But, in the past couple of years, they haven't tried a new election referendum or anything like that. Several of the former Catalan leadership are just now held as political prisoners in Madrid, and a few other live in exile. This past weekend, we had a conviction. The Spanish Supreme Court handed down a ruling. I believe there was a dozen or so Catalan officials who received 9 to 13 years in prison for sedition, which means holding an election. Now, I guess it really does bother me that the American media pays so much attention to something like what's going on in northwest Syria, or, what was happening to the Yazidis in 2013, or, the Syrian Kurds back when ISIS was, taking them out back and shooting them. But then completely ignore other kinds of atrocities that may be real and are happening in, U.S. allied countries where you think maybe the U.S. would have a little bit more influence. On to Afghanistan, where the Election Commission is charging that both frontrunners in the Afghanistan presidential elections that were held last month, of course, the current president of Afghanistan was running for re-election, and then a former, I guess, his kind of number 2, Abdullah was running as his main competitor. They say that both these guys committed massive election voter fraud. Amazing, right? So that, the U.S. continues to enforce elections on the Afghan people, which this round luckily wasn't as bloody as some of the past, but 85 people end up dying, hundreds injured, by, forcing the Afghans to have these extremely low voter turnout. Maybe that's why the violence was so low. So many of the polling sites were just straight up shut down. So, nobody could go vote. And I guess probably a lot of people didn't want to go vote because of the dangers. I documented on the show how Afghan women were afraid to go vote because all the biometric data that they have to give before going to the polling station. So I think a couple million people ended up voting, but a lot of the ballots don't have all the proper biometrics on them, and so they're just alleging rapid voter fraud. This is going to be an absolute mess, and for the United States, you would think, if we really were going to deliver this country a government, we've had a dozen or years so now of trying to do that, and it hasn't worked. This is the 3rd or 4th, presidential Western style election that they've held, and they continue to be a giant mess and just cause more death and violence. And it's not like anybody who's going to be elected here is going to, unite Afghanistan or fix the country. Or could even, if they had their heart in the right place, I think. So Reuters has an exclusive today, and I just want to say they have 2 unnamed officials, so maybe it's true. It seems to be kind of an official leak situation, so I'm guessing it is. But that the U.S. carried out major cyber attacks against Iran after the September 14th drone attack and cruise missile attack against the Saudi oil installations that shut down half of Saudi oil production. Now, again, the U.S. has provided no evidence that the Iranians were behind this. And since it was a cyber attack, it seems to me that it is an act of war. We're trying to harm the Iranians by, getting their computers to melt down or, do the wrong thing. They say that this was aimed at Iran's propaganda arm. I'm not sure what that means. That's pretty ambiguous. But anyways, this is an attack. Is there authorization from Congress? Was there any consulting of anybody in Congress? Why did Donald Trump decide to do this? Is there going to be a debate or discussion over whether the president has the power to carry out cyber attacks? Well, probably not, because this is just one of those stories that doesn't get a whole lot of attention, I think. So Daniel Larison has an important one on Yemen that will be linked in the show notes page. And in it, he describes a situation where the Yemeni government is now forcing cargo ships to pay duties first at the Port of Aden and then to travel to the Port of Hodeidah and pay another duty there. This has resulted in a 100% increase in the price of fuel, really reducing the fuel stockpiles that are around and likely to exacerbate the cholera epidemic that they currently have in Yemen. Hundreds of thousands of people, again, diagnosed with cholera or counted as cholera, although, they just have some kind of waterborne viral infection that could potentially kill them. We know that thousands of Yemenis have at least already died this way in the 4.5-year war that the United States has backed Saudi Arabia into that country, and more will continue to die until the U.S. withdraws their support. The other big update in Yemen is that I guess some kind of deal has been struck in southern Yemen. The UAE is handing over the city of Aden, which has, been made the second capital of Aden, as the government there has no ability. They don't even have an ability to travel to Aden, and they can't control that city, but they certainly can't take back the capital Sana'a from the Houthis. So that's kind of their de facto capital there. Well, now Saudi forces have replaced UAE forces there. A deal has been signed between the southern separatists and, the nominal Yemeni government that lives in Riyadh. I'm not sure what the details of that are, but again, the reports are that Saudi troops and UAE troops out of Yemen. That may not be in total UAE troops, but at least some estimates are 200 left in the city of Aden. All right, now on to Syria. I want to recap the whole, kind of unfolding of events here. If you haven't heard it already and you feel like you need an update on Syria, check out Foreign Policy Focus 406. Me and Joanne Leon break down the whole situation. So to start kind of from that show, it seems now that Americans have officially left the city of Manbij, and on the way out, there's reports that they helped Russians to navigate in the city, and there are some Russians now producing video of themselves in American bases. The media portrayal of this event is that Trump ordered the, withdrawal so spontaneously that Americans left in a hurry and a mess. I think that's not all the way true, at least. It seems that most of what was left around in the bases is trash, not weapons or anything important. So, this could just be, the Americans maybe even know that the Russians are likely to take this base and leave them a mess as, kind of you're welcome for establishing the base or something like that. But, I generally think the mainstream media reading into, oh my God, this was so sudden that the troops didn't have time to grab all their stuff. Exaggeration, my guess. It now appears that the Syrian troops are at least in a couple of cities near the Iraqi border, kind of Turkey, Syria, Iraq border area where those three countries come together. And then on Manbij and Kobani, which are near the Euphrates River along the Turkish-Syrian border. I've also now read reports, and this could be accurate or not. It's hard to say, that the Syrian army has also entered the city of Raqqa, which is, in kind of central East Syria, east of the Euphrates River, an Arab-held city that the Syrian Kurds have long held. No word yet on Deir ez-Zor or any of the more southern cities in Syria if the U.S. is withdrawing from there as well. As far as how many troops are actually leaving Syria, it's a little bit of a question mark. The number that has been floated around is 1,000, and hopefully that's true. But how many of them are being redistributed just to maybe other areas in southern Syria, or just shortly over the border in Iraq, basically doing the same thing, fighting the same war, again on the other side of the Syrian-Iraq border. I've read reports of clashes between just about everyone and everyone else, including that the Syrian army had clashed and that one Turkish soldier had been killed by the Syrian army. I'm not sure, if this is true or not. I think one of the problems is that there's so many layers and groups operating here. It wouldn't surprise me at all to learn that somebody in the SDF who is now allied with Assad killed a Turkish soldier. It wouldn't surprise me if the Syrian Arab Army killed one of the Free Syrian Army jihadist-type rebels that are now allied with Turkey. But, at least it got reported in media that the Syrian army had actually killed a Turkish soldier. The hope is that doesn't happen and that Russia is able to mediate some kind of deal between Assad and Erdogan to establish some sort of happy resolution for everybody in northeastern Syria, and that includes the Syrian Kurds. Now, my guess is that this isn't going to be wholly equal, that the Kurds will probably get screwed on it a little bit, but at the end of the day, hopefully this could be resolved without, major warfare and Turkey attempting to settle and ethnically cleanse northeastern Syria. Turkey, for their part, has said that they are not backing down. And in another, I think, somewhat important announcement, the Turkish army, or the Turkish president, said that they are now looking elsewhere for options to replace the F-35. So this likely, I guess, means Russian or Chinese fighter jets that Turkey will look to buy. All right, so there's a couple big media gaffes on Syria that I want to take the time to talk about. The first one is ABC, and this is the one that's caught more attention. Ben Swan did a really nice segment on it, where you have ABC having this, showing this video. I think the caption on the bottom says like slaughter in Syria or something, and they're talking about the Kurds being slaughtered in Syria. And then they're showing this footage, which they're claiming is occurring in Syria. They say ABC has obtained this footage, and it looks like, to a very untrained eye that, this is a town being blown apart by bombs. Well, it turns out that that's not true at all. This is, I'm guessing, a bunch of rednecks out on a firing range somewhere in Kentucky, having a lot of fun, shooting off a lot of guns. And they, make all these big explosions. And I wouldn't even be surprised to learn that at the time ABC had ran this story with something of an angle on the video of, oh my God, look how dangerous and armed American citizens are. But the video's not Syria at all. And so, I think there's a couple of points here. One, I think in part it absolutely humiliates all these fools in the drive-by media who, believe that they could tune into Syria whenever Assad's trying to retake Aleppo or Damascus or the situation in northeastern Syria is being worked out, and be able to cast these wide judgments and make these wide assertions and, quote unquote from their side, cover what's going on there. They absolutely can't do it. And it shows that not one person who watched this video at ABC goes, that doesn't look like a town in Syria being blown apart. So on that level, you would think, heads in that newsroom would be rolling. This would be extremely humiliating. My guess is that, they get off with it being kind of a little funny gaffe. What's his name? Steve Harvey announcing the Raw Miss America. I think that was him. I think that's how it's going to kind of be portrayed and looked at, and not as a major failure of integrity and journalism standards. And, I think the bigger point is it shows that they absolutely don't have a clue about Syria. And that's why they run around thinking that, oh my God, Trump is abandoning the Syrian Kurds and, kind of assuming that he could have done something about this situation. That's all not Obama's fault to start with. They understand on that context because the last time they cared about Syria at all is when Assad was trying to retake Aleppo from jihadist rebels. In that time, they didn't understand that it was far more complicated than Assad just killing civilians, because America had armed and trained a bunch of jihadist rebels that were wreaking havoc on the Syrian state. They were killing anybody who wasn't a radical Sunni Islamist. They were killing people for smoking cigarettes. They're dumping people in acid. They're burning them on fire. They're beheading them on video. These were the people that the Assad government was trying to stop. This is who they were fighting against. And yeah, it's not good that the Assad government killed some civilians in Aleppo, and it should be talked about and the news reporting could cover it. But the fact that they could never give the rest of the story just shows that, how incompetent they are at, doing their job. The other one, and I'm calling this a gaffe. I don't know if it actually was or if other people will agree with me, but Lindsey Graham is on Fox and Friends, and he says, and he tells the host there, that the reason that the U.S. has to stay in Syria is there's about 200 or more Israeli soldiers in southern Syria, and they have to stay there to carry out operations preventing the flow of weapons from Tehran to Beirut. So for people who've been listening to the show a long time, you've heard me talk about and debunk this narrative that the neocons and the warhawks always come up with, the idea that there's a land bridge, which is just a road between Tehran and Beirut now, and that's going to allow Iran to be more effective against Israel. Now, as Scott Horton points out very well, that this wouldn't exist whatsoever. The major, roadblock in that land bridge was Saddam Hussein. Well, oops, Americans killed him, and rather than putting in like the next general line in Iraq, they dissolved the whole government and tried to install a government in that country that ended up being Shia and now more favorable to the Iranians. And then they went in Syria and armed up a whole bunch of jihadists, and Bashar al-Assad had to rely on Iran to make sure that his country wasn't completely overrun, and he probably wasn't brutally murdered like Gaddafi by a bunch of head-chopping Sunni jihadist radical lunatics, backed by the United States, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Turkey. And so, that really increased the relationship between Iran and Assad. So to whatever extent that Iran is now able to better transition weapons between Tehran and Beirut than they were in 2001, well, that's all because of what the United States has done in the Middle East over the past 18 years. But the Iranians have been able to arm and supply Hezbollah for a long time, and that doesn't change here. And this whole thing about land bridge, they can't call it a road because everybody would just think it's the stupidest thing that they've ever heard. So they had to use this crazy terminology and call it a land bridge. Well, I really doubt the Israelis have the ability, especially as Assad, firmly gains more and more territory in Syria, to really do anything to prevent Iranian weapons from going from Tehran to Beirut to the extent that they are. I don't think the Iraqis will tolerate it forever. And so, this doesn't seem to be a lasting situation anyways. And the simple solution, of course, would be, to tell Lindsey Graham you're, an idiot and you're not seeing the obvious, that Trump should just get back in the JCPOA so we don't care what the Iranians are doing. All right, guys, I think that's where I'm done for the day. Hope you're liking the show. Share it. libertarianinstitute.org, at KYAAALE on Twitter, facebook.com/foreignpolicyfocus. And I am really trying to get back to the 3-a-week schedule. I've been really busy, kind of working 2 jobs here with, now working at antiwar.com. I think it's probably increasing the quality of every show, but it is making it hard to get 3 out a week. But I hope you guys are enjoying it. I really appreciate the support, and I'll be back at it again Friday.